a haircut, some stumbling blocks, and a crazy statue today on another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the preacher's husband. So today we're going through Ezekiel chapter 5 through 8. And tomorrow we're going to go through Ezekiel chapter 9 through 12. So let's get started. So, what do you think it will be like if you got your hair cut with swords? Well, believe it or not, there's actually people that do that and will cut your hair with swords. But that's what we start out with here in chapter 5 was God basically saying, now you, son of man, take a sharp sword and use it as you would a barber's razor and shave your head and beard. And it says you are to do these things with it. Well, essentially, this is referring to what's going to happen with the population of Israel. 2/3 of the population will be killed in the invasion, and 1/3 will be taken into exile. Now, from the last third of the hair that they're talking about here that was consigned to dispersion, Ezekiel was to take and bind some in the folds of his robe, right? So this portrayed survival of only a remnant of exiles. Hair scattered to the wind would be impossible to retrieve, but by tucking in the remnants of hair into his garment, Ezekiel indicated that the future of the people of God lays with the Babylonian exiles. Destruction would reach even some of those exiles as well, so not even all of them are going to survive all of this. We get to verse 10, and of course, cannibalism pops up once again. We've talked about the women eating their babies. Now we're talking about men eating their sons, essentially, and sons eating their fathers. And although cannibalism was prohibited in the law of Moses, we read about that in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and it was denounced by the prophets. Unfortunately, and kind of tragically, the Israelites resorted to cannibalism in Jerusalem during the siege and the subsequent fall to Babylon's forces in 588 through 586 BC. So, that brings us to chapter 6. We get into chapter 6. Verses 1 and 2, when God tells the prophet to face the mountains of Israel, it reflects the Lord's adverse attitude towards his people. The phrase mountains of Israel, it does not occur outside the book of Ezekiel. Mountains here represents the whole land because the land of Israel was all mountainous and it was all a bunch of hills. We read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 11, and you can look at a map and you can tell. Mountains were often the centers of idolatrous worship. Think about here and now in the United States. A lot of times when we find Satan worshiping cults, where are they? They're usually hidden back in the woods, in the hills, in the valleys, in the mountains. It's usually where they end up practicing their ceremonies. So this reference to Israel as mountainous is literally a reference to Israel's apostasy as well. I found that pretty interesting. Verse 7 here, it says that verse 7, the slain will fall among you, and you will know that I am the Lord. That's kind of an important statement. The phrase, you will know that I am the Lord, is known as a recognition formula. It's actually used some 60 times in Ezekiel, and it was frequently used in the context of the Exodus from Egypt as well. We saw it a lot in Exodus chapter 7 and 14. So that brings us to chapter 7. So here we are in Ezekiel chapter 7. Are you a stumbling block or are you a stepping stone? That is kind of an interesting question. Well, in verses 3 through 6 here, it talks about detestable practices. Now, these detestable practices, as it's listed here, verse 4, and for your detestable practices within you. A lot of times that's defined or translated as abominations. And typically anything that is defined as a detestable practice or an abomination carries the death penalty with it if you are found to have done something like this. So we get up here to verse 19. The end of it says, for these were the stumbling blocks, that brought about their iniquity. Now, if you did your reading, you will know that this is actually referring to wealth. Wealth had become the stumbling blocks for these people. So, what keeps you from God? Because isn't that really what a stumbling block is? Something that stands in your way or trips you up and keeps you from getting to your goal or your destination. And of course, our goal is a relationship with God. Some of these stumbling blocks can be addictions, our own personal actions, our personal wants, our lusts, our jealousy, our wealth, if we focus on it more than what we do for God, or even politics. My dad used to say that the love of money was the root of all evil. But then he would add on at the end, but when you have a lot of money, it sure makes the whole mess a lot sweeter. So, anyway, money's not really evil. It's just that lust after it, that love of money. If you focus on it more than you're focusing on God and your family and things, that's when it becomes a problem. So, what are some things that keep you from God? I'll let you think and ponder on that one. Next, we're going to go into chapter 8. Now, this is titled Visionary Journey to Jerusalem, but this entire section here, chapter 8, 1 through 18, is all about the defilement of the holy sanctuary, right? So, verse 5 stood out to me. It says, "The Lord said to me, Son of man, look toward the north. I looked towards the north, and there was this offensive statue north of the altar gate at the entrance." And I got to thinking, what in the world is this offensive statue? What could this be? Maybe a golden calf? Could it be like some naked statue of a dude or a naked statue of a lady? Something that's kind of offensive to us now? Would it be like, I don't know, a statue of somebody flipping you the bird? I mean, what could be an offensive statue? Well, this term actually translated occurs elsewhere only in Deuteronomy chapter 4:16 and in 2 Chronicles chapter 33 verses 7 and 15. Now, this image may have actually been one of the Asherahs set up in the temple by Manasseh, if you remember those Asherah poles that they would set up. In 2 Kings chapter 21, we read about that, and also 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verse 7 and 15, as I said before. So this conclusion is suggested by the use of the same word in the reference to Manasseh's idol in 2 Chronicles 33, verse 7 and verse 15. Since we have those connections with all three of these ideas coming together, that this offensive statue is probably one of those Asherah poles that they were worshiping. We get to verse 12 and 13, and in verse 12, it says, "He said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his idol? For they are saying, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has abandoned the land." Now, they were in the darkness here, and they were hiding from God, whom they said had abandoned them. All right? They had completely abandoned, God had completely abandoned Israel. So they were in here in the dark hiding from him. Why would you hide from somebody that's not there? If God had abandoned Israel, why would they feel the urge to hide from him? I found that to be interesting, and I've not really found an answer to that question. So if you have an answer to it, maybe post it in the comments. And we get to verse 16. This is kind of the final thought of it all here. It says, "So he brought me to the inner court of the Lord's house, and there were about 25 men at the entrance of the Lord's temple, between the portico and the altar, with their backs to the Lord's temple, and their faces turned towards the east. They were bowing to the east in worship of the sun." Now, the final and the supreme act of idolatry here, this is what this is. It took place within the inner court of the temple itself, where 25 men bowed towards the east, worshiping the sun. Now, according to 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 5, worship of the sun god appears to have gained sponsorship during the reign of Manasseh, who also built altars for foreign gods in the courts of the temple, right where they were. The area between the portico and the altar was probably for use by priests alone, and was where they prayed to God on a fast day. So, that being the case, that's what I have for you today. That's what was interesting to me. What stood out to you? I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button, subscribe button. Of course, click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video. And hit the little boxing globe so you can rumble with me on Rumble. And we'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. We'll see you then.